Thank you so much for coming. My name is Mark Williams. I'm Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Film and Television Studies here at Dartmouth, and have been convening the Humanities Institute this term entitled Cyberdisciplinarity. And this conference is our second public event held in conjunction with that institute. I hope you were here in April for the Symposium on Digital Arts, which was wonderful, and I'm sure that this is going to be equally wonderful, and with the advantage of being even more extensive. If you picked up a program, you'll notice that we have an opening panel this afternoon, and then a day of panels tomorrow in a different location. It's in Filene Auditorium in Moore Hall, which is kind of the opposite end of campus, but it's a very popular place for various public events to occur. I imagine that most of you are familiar with it, but if you're not familiar with it, please come talk to us after the event today, and we'll be happy to give you instructions to that site. And the events tomorrow morning begin at 10 a.m. The Institute is on an interesting and experimental topic, this notion of cyberdisciplinarity. And by that, we mean to begin to formulate new questions about two phenomena. One is the effect of the rise of digital culture on the academic disciplines as traditionally defined. And the other is the effect on relationships between knowledge and power and information with the rise of digital culture. So the first panel that we have today will be a perfect instance of what we're trying to achieve with the Institute, which is providing a forum for people from very different kinds of positions and perspectives and approaches to a similar subject matter to come together and learn from one another's work and ask new questions in relationship to one another's work. So I'm very excited by the opportunity this affords. Let me quickly thank the people who paid for all of this, which is an important thing to do always. The Fannie and Alan Leslie Center for the Humanities sponsors these Humanities Institutes one per year. The Dickey Center for International Understanding was fundamental to allowing us to invite people to Dartmouth from places very far away, which we were happy to do. And the rest of the sponsors gives you an idea of the kind of interdisciplinary attention that our efforts have already drawn. The Institute for Security Technology Studies, the Hood Museum of Art, the Departments of English, Sociology, Government, and Geography, the Rockefeller Center, the MALS program, and my own Department of Film and Television Studies. So we thank all of them for their extraordinary support. And it's now my happy opportunity to introduce my boss, who's significant to all things that go on in the humanities, Associate Dean Lenore Grenoble.
Thank you very much. I actually never think of myself as your boss, so that was kind of a nice surprise. I would, first of all, like to welcome you all to this conference, and especially for those of you from out of town. I realize that if you were here this morning and got up early, as I did, the weather might not have been what you anticipated for the middle of May, so I'm very happy that you didn't change your minds and just leave. I'm also happy for those of you who've been outside recently, and it's gorgeous, decided to come inside. We always have to weigh that. There's so few opportunities for gorgeous weather around here. And second, I would very much like to thank Mark for all that he has done to organize this conference, the preceding symposium, and the Humanities Institute as a whole. The institutes provide a wonderful opportunity for a group of faculty to study a topic in depth with their colleagues from Dartmouth and those from outside, and they've been very successful in all kinds of ways. This topic is particularly interesting and exciting, and I'm especially grateful to Mark for all the added effort he has put into it, for arranging this conference in conjunction with it, bringing so many people to campus and bringing your ideas to those of us who aren't able to participate in the Institute itself. And finally, I want to thank Mark for inviting me to greet you and identifying me as his boss. Now, when I first heard about his plans for a conference on cyberdisciplinarity, my reaction was, wow, really, is this going to work? How is he going to get living, breathing bodies into a room to discuss this as an idea? Is that really workable? Is that a realistic approach for a conference meant to survey the critical issues attendant to the rise of cyberculture? After all, already in 1994, Timothy Leary had declared in Chaos and Cyberculture, his cyberpunk manifesto, that true excursions of the mind would not happen in fleshware, but through the uncharted regions of Siberia with CY. This is especially interesting for me. I work in the other Siberia. Leary went so far as to proclaim PCs would be the LSD of the future, with addiction the expected outcome. So I was fairly secure when I talked to Mark that I would not find myself standing up in front of a live audience examining disciplines in cyberculture, but instead would be typing an anonymous hello, welcome into a terminal. And I have done this before. When we held the Turing test here a few years ago, I happily agreed to be one of the judges. Unfortunately for me, and even more unfortunately for them, I misidentified a pretty large number of the people and terminals as computer programs. So actually, for your own sakes, it's probably better to meet me live in the flesh. Anyways, here I am, and there you are. Since Leary's book appeared, we have learned to find our own space in cyberspace. We have joined the information superhighway, accepted virtual technologies, joined virtual communities, created networlds and cyber societies, and in the process, we have participated in contemporary society's transformation from biomorphism to technomorphism. We have become part of a world that defines communities in terms of shared communication, not shared space. Even the intellectual community, perhaps especially the intellectual community, depends on colleagues in far-flung locations to form the virtual departments we wish we had. As a linguist, for example, I have recently been trying to organize a conference at MIT with a colleague who's actually in Chiapas and another one who's actually in China. As Associate Dean, I have to say I get a very different kind of cyber communication. I would guess I get at least 100 or so emails a day from my colleagues here at Dartmouth, all of whom want an immediate response. As a linguist with a special interest in language endangerment, the widespread use of IT and shared communication hits home for me in a very specific way. It has created speech communities across oceans and has led to the rapid spread and globalized use of English, often, almost always, to the detriment of minority indigenous languages. The creation of such global speech communities will have a long-lasting effect on language use and language change, whose implications we still have not begun to grasp. But even more than community, the availability of information through online sources has redefined how I put together lectures and do research in my field, and even how I disseminate that research. Most days I sit in front of my computer for long hours doing business and scholarship. As Timothy Leary pronounced, welcome to Screenland, the picture window into Siberia. And as he predicted, pure information has become cheaper than water and electricity. Soon, with Google's massive digital library project and the French-based European corresponding venture, I will be able to access huge tracts of information once only available to pilgrims who journeyed into repositories of knowledge such as the Library of Congress or the Bibliothèque Nationale. Yet such changing technologies bring about paradigm shifts which require reflection. Thus, I see your task this weekend as one to help us look beyond the shifting landscape of scholarship and the popular hype-driven essays on cyberspace, or what Mark Deary calls cyberdrool. Instead, you will be examining cyberspace as a signifier of culture, questioning content, access, privacy, and technological infrastructure. You will debate the qualities of virtual experience and its effects on society. And you will discuss digital ownership, censorship, and distribution. We are clearly facing what Rob Shields once called a crisis of boundaries, and this conference can help us as we try to map our new world order. In the end, trying to make sense of change as the change continues around us is a daunting but important task. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and deliberations, but I also want to leave you where we began, with Timothy Leary. He suggested 3 possible solutions to the shifting landscape of cyberculture. His first solution was based on religion. Since the apocalypse is inevitable, the only thing to do is pray. His second is founded on political principles. Grab what you can and protect what you've got. And his third image uses science as its model. Increase your intelligence, expand your consciousness, and surf the waves of chaotic change. And of course, to that I would add, have fun. So with that, I would like to turn everything over to Professor Ben Forrest from the Department of Geography, who will be the moderator for our first panel today, Representation and Politics in the Digital Age. Thank you.
Now, if you've actually turned everything over to me, I guess that makes me everyone's boss. So, thanks. I appreciate the promotion. Well, let me extend a welcome to everyone to this panel on representation and politics in the digital age. I'd also like to remind everyone that there'll be a reception in the Kim Gallery upstairs immediately following the panel at 3:30. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our three distinguished speakers for the afternoon in order: Joe Trippi, Lisa Nakamura, and Michael Curry. Now, many of you will already be familiar with Joe Trippi. He gained wide recognition during the last presidential campaign as National Campaign Manager for Howard Dean. But this was really only his most recent position in a career that's included work on the presidential campaigns of Edward Kennedy, Walter Mondale, Gary Hart, and Richard Gephardt, along with numerous other senatorial and mayoral races. For the Dean campaign, he pioneered the use of online technology to organize what became a vibrant grassroots movement in presidential politics. By using the internet for small donor fundraising, Dean for America raised more money than any Democratic presidential campaign in history. It reversed the contemporary pattern of political fundraising, with its donations averaging less than $100 apiece. Most recently, he wrote "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised: Democracy, the Internet, and the Overthrow of Everything." Hopefully not my new position as boss. In this book, he chronicles how his use of the internet and desire to change politics as usual grew into a national grassroots movement with potentially revolutionary consequences. And I believe he'll draw on this book today for his presentation, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." Our second speaker is Lisa Nakamura, an assistant professor of communication arts and visual culture studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Before going to Madison, she earned her doctorate in English at the CUNY Graduate Center and then taught at the Sonoma State University in Northern California. Her work is in the new scholarly discipline of cyberculture studies. In her most recent book, Cybertypes: Race, Ethnicity, and Identity on the Internet, she examines cross-racial passing in a variety of electronic and cyber media. Before publication of Cybertypes, she also co-edited the book Race in Cyberspace. She subsequently published numerous book chapters on these topics, including Remastering the Internet, The Work of Race in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, in the book The Archaeology of Multimedia. And I'm very much looking forward to a presentation today on subjects and objects of interactivity, digital race formation, and media convergence. And then finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce my good friend and graduate advisor, Michael Curry. Michael is a professor of geography and communication studies at UCLA. He's also held visiting fellow positions at Harvard, Rutgers, the University of Edinburgh, and Boston University. Before coming to UCLA, Michael had a long and eclectic career, including positions as an architectural draftsman, a furniture maker, a cartographer, and a college vice president. So he really knows what it means to be a boss. He holds degrees in liberal arts, philosophy, and geography from New College of Florida and the University of Minnesota. Michael's scholarly interests are difficult to summarize, but they include the role of technologies, and in particular, the impact of geographic information systems, remote surveillance technology, global positioning systems, and computer-assisted cartography. He addresses these issues in detail in his 1998 book, Digital Places: Living with Geographic Information Technologies. Now, in addition to Digital Places, Michael is also the author of The Work in the World, Geographic Practice in the Written Word, published in 1996, and has written well over 30 other articles and book chapters. His talk today is titled The Promise of Provenance: Networks, Narratives, and the New Model of Object Management. Please join me in welcoming these three speakers.
Thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to the conference today. I want to start by sort of, from a practitioner point of view in politics, at least what I think is going on. It's clear that, at least in the political world, power is, what we're experiencing is a huge power shift back to people instead of the political parties and the top-down structure of most of the institutions in the United States or in the world. I mean, corporations are top-down. The two political parties are definitely top-down, and the government is top-down institutions. And what I believe is going on is one of the larger power shifts in history where because of the internet and technology, information and knowledge is becoming more available democratically to anybody who has access to the net and to the technology. And as that continues to move forward, it's creating a massive shift of power. If information and knowledge is power, then the net and the information age is really the age of empowerment. It's actually delivering information and giving access to knowledge to more people than ever before. And the way they use that information and knowledge to gain and join together in communities to exert their power is becoming, to me, clearer and clearer. My view is the first iteration of what I'm talking about was Napster. We didn't see it first in politics. We saw the bottom using the connectivity of the net to combine and join and wreak havoc from the bottom on a top-down recording industry. And whether Napster won or lost, the fact is that the recording industry has been changed forever. The way music is distributed is totally different than the way the recording industry wanted to distribute it. And that was something that was forced on the industry from the bottom, again, with lots of people, millions of them, using technology in a new way to connect with each other and to share files. The Dean campaign, in my view, was the same thing. It was the bottom, people at the bottom, not in the establishment, because the establishment's a very top-down structure. They couldn't get their ideas or to change things through. They came together on the net, used the net to form a community of 650,000 people, and raised more money and did things differently and did it in a way that was anathema to the top-down Democratic Party establishment. A lot of people who you have to bow and curtsy to get their support for President of the United States, we didn't bow or curtsy to. We didn't ask for permission. We went around them. If we had asked their permission, they would have told us to leave and don't worry about banging the door on the way out. And so those 650,000 people ended up raising more money at the time than any Democratic candidate in history, including President Clinton, who had set the previous record, and I might point out did not set that record as the governor of Arkansas running for president of the United States. He set the record as the president of the United States running for re-election in 1996, and with all due respect to the president, we did not have the Lincoln bedroom to sell for $100,000 a pop. We did it with people, again, combining, networking, using the connectivity of the net to join and raise more, and again, in a sort of exercise of power, raise more money than the old folks, the established folks do it, holding $1,000 a plate dinners. And I think it's instructive to talk about where the idea for the Dean campaign came from. It actually happened in 1995, and I think it says a lot, at least about how I think the change is happening and what it really means. In 1995, I was on the internet. It really isn't the internet we know today, but what it was in 95. I had about 10 minutes. I was a guy who was making television commercials for governors and senators and members of Congress or challengers. And I had very little time. I jumped on the net. I had 10 minutes. I would check out my email, obviously. I'd spend 3 or 4 minutes at some news site like CNN.com, and then I went away for 3 minutes of Trippy's private vacation from the world, which was a bulletin board And my first confession is it was a stock trading bulletin board, a Motley Fool stock trading bulletin board. My next part of my confession is it was a bulletin board for a company called THQ. THQ makes video games for platforms like the Xbox, the PlayStation, and the Game Boy. And yeah, I like to play those games, so that's why I spent so much time on the board. But the instructive thing that happened was there was a guy on the board named David Haynes who, you know, if you read that board quite a bit and were part of the community that was forming around that board, he sort of just stood out as someone who had a lot of information, knew a lot about the company. If he said a game wasn't any good, if you went and played it, it usually turned out not to be any good. And if it was great and he said so, it usually turned out to be great. And so I'd look for him when I came to that board. And one day he went missing for 5 days. And the board was sort of up in arms. You know, what happened to David? He came back on the site and said, guys, I'm really sorry, but my wife just gave birth to our first child, a boy named Christian. Most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life. It just changed my life. It's an amazing experience. And by the way, this latest game from THQ really sucks. And for the next 2 years, you learned that he was an amateur triathlete who never won a race he entered, that he had a dog named Brew and a cat named Sophie. You learned that the new THQ game was really great. And by the way, Christian walked for the first time today. And at the end of 18 months, he told us the great news about his wife giving birth to a baby daughter. 3 months later, someone came on the site and said, I've got horrible news. Today, David Haynes died of a massive heart attack at age 31. What I saw happen next was pretty amazing. People on that board, thousands of people across the country from disparate geographic communities, began to eulogize David Haynes as if they were his best friend. It dawned on me then that these people in this cyber community knew more about David Haynes than his next door neighbor knew about him. They had read lots of things that he had put forth over time. And the next thing that happened was somebody suggested that we start an educational fund for his children, that he was only 31, Christian was 18 months old, the daughter was only 3 months old, what could he have put away? We should do something and raise money and help put his kids through college. And someone opened up the account, and me and a bunch of other people had never met this guy. And this is 1995. This is long before sending money over the net or anything was sort of a normal occurrence. Raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of days in that educational trust fund for his family, and so what that said, that right then and there, I said to myself, if I ever did anything insane like run another presidential or get involved in a presidential campaign, what would happen if you used this technology to build that kind of community, this community that itself formed itself? THQ knew nothing about this board. I mean, they didn't even know that the thing existed. The Motley Fool, it was one of 10,000 Motley Fool boards at the time. They probably knew the metrics, how many hits and posts and things like that. But what was going on the board, they had no knowledge of. This was a self-formed community that had become, in a lot of ways stickier than a lot of our local communities offline. And the idea was, how do you do that? Could you do that in a presidential campaign to strengthen our democratic system, to get people to participate in our elections at a time when participation's going lower? And I decided when I got the call from Howard Dean that I was going to try to do that. These communities are pretty amazing things. And the best example that I can give of how strong they are, people make the mistake of thinking that eBay is an auction site or that eBay is somehow a merchandising site. eBay is not any of those things. If you talk to the founders of eBay or anybody involved in the company, they'll tell you that eBay is a community, that they do that they work very hard to build that community and to let people exchange ideas, rate each other, and be involved. Best Buy is the #1 seller of electronics to consumers in this country. They run around every year trying to make sure that they stay ahead of Circuit City, which is number 2, and Walmart, which is number 3. In late 2003, Best Buy found out it wasn't number 1 anymore, and it wasn't Circuit City, and it wasn't Walmart. In the fall of 2003, Best Buy was supplanted as number 1 by eBay. eBay had sold $0 of consumer electronics consumers in 2002. In the first 9 months of 2003, they sold $3 billion directly to consumers and supplanted Best Buy as number 1. The mistake Best Buy makes is to think that this is a auction site or a merchandising site. No, it's a community of 145 million people. If that community decides tomorrow that it's going to stick itself on electronics, it will dominate electronics. And so what we did was sort of try to take all that experience that had accrued through the 90s and into the early 2000s and decide to try to create that kind of community and to build that kind of bottom-up power structure to take a guy to the White House. Obviously, we didn't make it. I will be happy during Q&A to answer why and how, but very little of it had to do with technology, the internet, the power of grassroots organizing over the net, or how people connect with each other, and most of it had to do with just basic politics. You can't say you have a hole in your resume and that you don't understand foreign policy and defense. That tends to get people to decide they're not going to vote for you. It has nothing to do with whether somebody's working on a 486 IBM PC or is out there knocking on doors. My belief is that we are watching the biggest shift in power that's probably ever occurred. That in a lot of ways, if the printing press distributed knowledge and information in new ways that changed everything, if all you do is think of the internet and technology is finally getting us to a two-way printing press, the sheer power of that is going to be something that is radically going to be disruptive and change everything. And I'll give you one example, and then I'll turn it over. But it's not just going to change politics. It's going to change representation in government. It's going to change the way corporations communicate with all of us. And the barrier to entry is so low now that any group of citizens can start something on the net and start to build a community that has real power, that the existing structures are in trouble of being reformed against their will, as like the recording industry, if that's what happens, but or with them, and they have to make the decision. But I want to give you one example. How many people here in the room viewed This Land Is Your Land? The jib jab thing that made fun of Kerry and Bush, so what, about half, more than that. You're one of 65 million Americans who viewed that thing. And if you were like me and a bunch of other people I talked to, you laughed a lot when you watched it. If you're Wendy's and the woman who said she found a finger in her soup, that whole thing that just happened, and the jib jab was done by two guys with $500. Wendy's was two people away, two guys in a garage away, from having a very funny cartoon immediately spreading after that word got out of cartoon South Park kind of characters biting into Wendy's burgers and a finger pops out, putting a spoon in the soup and a finger pops out of the soup. And then the next scene is people dancing at a Wendy's restaurant on the tables with fingers missing as they dance to silly music. And a lot of people out there would have thought that was the funniest thing they ever saw and immediately send that on in their address book to more friends. And suddenly you have a problem because corporate communications today is not designed to try to figure out how you're going to tell 65 million people just laugh like out loud that if you bite into a Wendy's burger, you get human parts, which I think would have, they're losing $1 million a day right now, just given the way the mainstream media has covered this. And my guess is that the corporate spokesperson putting out a 90-second MPEG video that says we're happy to announce that she was arrested this morning for fraud is not going to have the same impact in terms of people forwarding that on and virally sending it on to their friends. And so you're suddenly seeing how two people with very low dollars can impact a major multi-billion-dollar corporation. And the same kind of thing, I think, in our politics and in the way we govern. The last thing I'll talk about is I think you're going to see a day soon when a politician will send their health care plan directly to the American people and say, I'm not sending it to Congress till July 1st. I'm sending it to you directly. I want you to understand what's in this plan. There's a synopsis on the top of it. We're going to have meetups around the country to talk about my health care plan. I want to have a discussion with you about it and not with the lobbyists. And then I'm going to send it to Congress. And let me tell you that you are going to be, we'll send it to Congress, and the strongest lobby in the world at that moment is going to be you. And you'll decide whether it passes or not. And so I think, by the way, I think this is likelier to occur like in a mayoral position, but you're going to start seeing this medium have a bigger and bigger impact on governance and politics, as well as a bunch of other things. So thank you very much.
I'd now like to invite Lisa Nakamura.
This is sort of pink. I don't know why, but let me try and get this working. Is there an AV person here who could maybe say why it looks this way? Okay. All right. Well, I'll just start then. I need to show my video in a couple minutes. So, to argue for the necessary intervention of visual culture studies in internet studies, one might ask, how does the internet's visual culture create, withhold, foreclose, distribute, deny, and modulate the creation of visual and digital capital? Visual media are as often as not today viewed through the lens and logic of the computer-driven interface, making ways of negotiating, navigating, and situating oneself via its landscape of chapter titles, hyperlinks, and menus a necessary aspect of media use. DVDs, satellite television and radio, and DVRs like TiVo and Replay all compel a series of choices, choices which, when made, foreclose other choices. The narrowing and piecing up of the formerly continuous image stream of a film into named chapters, as in the case of commercial cinematic DVDs, and the separation of songs played on the radio into genres like electronica, boombox, and R&B urban, as in the case of Sirius satellite radio playlists, breaks up what had been a more flow-oriented media experience into digitized separate streams, or as channels are now called in the Sirius interface. This packetizing of media into different categories follows ethnic, linguistic, national, and racialized lines. So the trade-off when you have Sirius radio, as I have, is you get to know what song is being played at any given time and who's playing it, which is great, but it will tell you what kind of song it is as well. It was a gospel song, urban song, rap song, etc. Somehow Dire Straits and U2 fit into every category. I don't know. So this categorization into various identity-oriented lines can be seen really clearly in the case of the 1999 video by Jennifer Lopez, If You Had My Love, which mirrors this logic of the interface and its policing of categories by chopping up and streaming the star's image body into identifiable ethnic and racialized modes. If you hate Jennifer Lopez, thank you for being tolerant of the bad quality of these images. If I were a film critic, I'd be apologizing for how bad it looks. But because I'm an internet person, I always show bad images. because the internet, and this is where I'm going to be talking about media convergence, I got this off the internet because I got it through a file sharing program, and it's fair use because I'm showing it to you guys. So here we have two kinds of media convergence. This was downloaded using a program called Acquisition, which is a file sharing program for the Macintosh, and it overtly references media convergence as well in the form of internet television, which, as Geert pointed out to me a while ago, in 1999 was still pie in the sky, and I think is really pie in the sky now. So in a sense, we have two different kinds of converging media, one having to do with the sourcing of images of stars that we see off of the internet, in this case, a third, fourth generation copy. In addition, we have the ways in which Jennifer Lopez herself has been dubbed a multimedia star from the beginning. She has a presence in film, music, and fashion, perfume as well. This convergence of sometimes separate spheres mirrors the convergence of media displayed in the video, and also her converging of different positions vis-a-vis ethnic identity and different audiences. Her real-life transformation from an ethnic star, defined primarily by her appearance in ethnic films like Selena and Mi Familia, in which her racialized Latina body serves to authenticate the realness of Latino mise-en-scène, to a global or unracialized star as an Out of Sight or The Wedding Planner, she has one now with Jane Fonda, I forget what it's called, is mirrored in the video's modes of identity management via the interface. The interface lets you have Jennifer Lopez in a variety of ethnic and racialized modes by clicking on one of the many links. So I'll show you that one. It addresses the audience by figuring her kinetic body as plastic, part of a racial project of volitional racialization through interface usage. This video compels a different kind of media analysis than had been necessary prior to the massification of networked interface visual communication. Earlier modes of reading television and film don't really work with this, because the prominence of the interface in this is really more than just a framing device. Interfaces function as a viewing apparatus, and in this case, they create the conditions for viewing. Rigorous readings of the internet interface in and outside of its convergence with photography, film, television, and interfaces from other digital genres are crucial for understanding how modern race and gender are constructed as categories and sometimes not choices. Interfaces inform all media, videos, television, literature, and as this happens, we are witnessing the creation of new power differentials in visual capital. Internet scholars define themselves partially as people who are interested in the history and use of digital interfaces in the context of computers and networks, but this video is hybrid in several ways. For one, it references a tradition of racialism, gendered relations of looking and seeing that internet scholars aren't really accustomed to thinking about outside the context of online communities of color and websites about gender. This type of hybrid media object, this video, requires a convergent mode of criticism and interpretation, a visual culture of the internet. Interfaces are an indispensable part of the media experience of both on and offline cultures. They are inextricably tied to the contemporary racial project of producing volitional racial mobility in the service of new forms of capitalism. So I think Lopez is cross-marketing herself as being ethnic sometimes and not ethnic other times as a way to produce capital as a star. We are in a moment of continual and delicate negotiation between the positions of the object and the subject of digital visual culture. To repurpose Omi and Wining's influential theory of racial formation, in this book, in this presentation, I wish to posit a theory of digital racial formation, which would parse the ways that digital modes of cultural production and reception are complicit with this ongoing practice. Studies of cyberculture have long noted, for good or ill, the identification of a mobile perspective in the context of network communication with a privileged, omnipotent, yet fragmented gaze. Interactivity is written about as if it were a drug, the drug of choice, like LSD for hippies, for cultural elites or network subjects. Choice, presence, movement, possibility are all terms which could describe the experiential modalities of web surfing, as Tara McPherson writes. And during the web's relatively short commercial history, they have been integral to the rhetoric of the new networked economy that sells choice and possibility as a side effect of digital analog media convergence. The celebration of fulfilled user desire can be, as she points out, illusory, especially when linked to the enhanced ability to just buy things. So that's not much of a kind of interactivity, I think, just to buy things, though eBay, I guess, disagrees. However, the distinction here seems to be between different varieties of user experience, to paraphrase William James. While there are disagreements about just how empowering digital interactivity may be, there seems little argument about its offering its users more in the way of agency. So this seems to be a strand throughout cyberculture studies, that interactivity is good because it provides agency. Indeed, there is a way in which possessing the volitional mobility afforded by the web in particular constitutes a particular kind of viewing subject, one who possesses and is empowered by visual capital. The internet has created and defined digital visual capital, a commodity which we mark as desirable by conferring upon it the status of a language unto itself. We now speak of digital literacy as well as visual and the ordinary sort of literacy. Lev Manovich's Language of New Media presumes that digital media constitute a new logic or typology of meaning. Though he is careful to interrogate this assumption, it is often claimed that interactivity is the salient aspect of this language that makes it different from others. Interactivity is envisioned as empowering. It creates clicking and interacting subjects. The myriad ways that interactivity creates a subject has been the subject of much writing. This particular form of agency has had its highs and lows and detractors and supporters over the years. I wish to examine the ways that visual capital is created on the internet, because if we're just beginning to understand what the subject of interactivity might be like, who or what is its object? Because there has to be one. Lisa Parks defines visual capital as a system of social differentiation based on users' and viewers' relative access to technologies of global media, end quote. This is a really good formulation in my view because it stresses ongoing processes of differentiation and access, rather than assuming that access to technology like the internet is binary, either you have it or you don't have it. Instead, I think she's saying it's about relative access. The problematic that I wish to delineate here has to do with parsing the multiple gradations and degrees of access, and these shadings are contingent upon variables like class, race, nationality, and gender. It's important to avoid reifying these terms, however, and to instead stress that they are, in part, constituted by the subject's relation to these very technologies of global media. These questions of identity constitution via digital technology has tended to get elided in critical discussions of internet access, or when they're discussed, it's usually as inconvenient stumbling blocks that stand in the way of the ultimate goal, universal access. What has yet to be explored are the ways that race and gender permit differential access to digital visual capital, as well as the distinctive means by which people of color and women create and in some sense redefine it. Women and people of color are both subjects and objects of interactivity. They participate in digital racial formation via acts of technological appropriation, but are subjected to it as well. So rather than focusing on the idea that women and minorities need to get online, the digital divide discourse, we might ask, how do they use their digital visual capital? In what ways are their racialized bodies a form of this new type of capital? What sorts of laws does this currency operate under? It doesn't change everything, but what does it change? This brings us back to the privileging of interactivity and its traditional linkage with the creation of a newly empowered subject. Lev Manovich writes about something he calls the myth of interactivity. In other words, the way that menus, in particular in computers, ask us to identify with someone else's mental structure. So rather than giving you unlimited choice to go or pick whatever you like, in fact, you have fairly limited and bounded choices. And the myth is the belief that this constitutes agency in some way, because we are instead following pre-programmed, objectively existing associations. So Manovich says that stars today, stars' bodies are very much like interfaces in that we identify with them in the act of watching them. And so just as we have a well-developed theory of cultural capital and viewer identification involving stars, so too must we now view the interface itself as an object which compels particular sorts of identifications, investments, ideological seductions. And just as star bodies like Jennifer Lopez's provoke the viewer's gaze and function as part of what Omi and Winant call a racial project, so too do new media objects. Interactivity is indeed a myth and will remain so until and unless its participation in gendered and racialized construction is examined in light of cultural formation theory. So what does an object of interactivity look like? In Jennifer Lopez's video, If You Had My Love, the singer portrays herself as the object, not the subject, of the volitional mobility afforded the web user. She's not ever shown using a computer. She's only shown as the object of usage for other people. Shots of Lopez tracked by surveillance cameras alternate with her image as represented in a website. She shares the stage and the gaze with new media design interfaces in which she is embedded in an extremely overt way. When this video was made, there was no Jennifer Lopez website. In fact, this software was commissioned as part of the project of making a website for her. This puts a new spin on the traditional female position as object of the gaze. While the video and its implied web interface, so I'll move back a little bit, allow the user multiple points of entry into a digital image, streaming, still, live, buffered, and represents the image as having rooms like a house in a way that can be entered in a kind of spatial sense. Lopez herself is never represented as the user or viewer, only the viewed. In this way, the video gestures towards a traditional formulation of the gaze, as described by John Berger in relation to traditional portraiture. In other words, Lopez presents herself in this video as the object of interactivity, despite her position as the star and the knowing object of the interactive gaze. Examining the video allows a double viewing of both interactivity and the star's body, the way that the object of desire, the star, can work with the subject of interactivity, figured misleadingly in this video as the user. So you're watching somebody use the website, basically, or witnessing their interactivity. In fact, it's really the interface designer whose work conditions the limits and possibilities of interactivity in this case. If we view the media complex that is J.Lo as a racial project, we can see the ways that the range of clickable options and categories available to the presumptive user in the video conditions the sorts of understanding of her raciality that are articulated to us. In this video, we're asked to identify not just with the web designer's way of thinking, but with the viewer's way of clicking as well. The conditions of watching the video require us to see from his perspective. We cannot but shoulder surf, since the setup has to do with witnessing interactivity as a means of viewing the star's body, and we're also put in the position in which you must watch the male watcher watching her. In this video, we have access to the star's body and the viewer's mind. We see her as he sees her through interface use. The split represents a paradigmatic dichotomy in gender theory. The body is that of a Latina woman. The viewer is a normative male gaze. This video with Jennifer Lopez's first was #1 for 9 weeks in 1999. Her DVD biography says that this was her first #1 single, this song. It was a really popular song. It topped the Hot 100 for 5 weeks in 1999. The single sold 1.2 million copies. What's interesting about it as well is that it's digital from the ground up. It was made by a production company called Band from the Ranch, who created a fictional software to go with this. This isn't a software that exists anywhere else. It was made just for this movie. It's interesting as well that Lopez's rise as a star is coincident with the internet's rise as a mainstream visual culture. So in 1999, we can witness the shift occurring from one mode of influence, old media, to another. Like The Matrix, If You Had My Love visually represents active navigation through data. Clicking on links enables the viewer to loop through time. By backtracking, the viewer can start at the beginning of the video, rewind to watch a favorite piece repeatedly, which you see in the video. The same pieces get played over and over again, sort of time shifted in that way. It opens with a scene of a man sitting at his computer desk in a darkened room of his apartment, typing the words Jennifer Lopez into a search field in a web browser. Her website pops up and she starts singing and dancing as he watches, alternately typing on the keyboard, which he holds on his lap as he leans back and strokes his own neck and face in an overtly kind of cybersexual gesture. People who were reading about online identity and phone sex in 1995 remember that Sandy Stone, among others, said that this was the best metaphor she could think of for internet telepresence, phone sex, because it has its bodily involvement in this kind of textual interactivity. So this video acknowledges that with a nod to the internet's most technologically sophisticated, longest standing, and profitable usage, even more than eBay, porn. The rest of the video consists of scenes of Jennifer Lopez viewed through her website as we witness people in a wide selection of network computing environments watching her. We see a young girl in her bedroom with her computer. Her parents probably bought her for school. A pair of mechanics watching a wall-mounted television with internet connection as the car explodes. A rack of call center workers with headphones and computers. And 2 young Latina women using a laptop in their kitchen. So this idea of ubiquitous computing is invoked, along with the ubiquitous star image. These scenes clearly reference television internet convergence as they depict public and private televisual screens and both solitary and shared instances of screen usage. Some people are watching by themselves, some people are watching together. What strikes me about this video, however, is that it's really, really intimate in a way. We watch the man keyboarding and mousing. We see Lopez's image interacting with it. We see the surveillance camera following her into one of her rooms as he manipulates the joystick. Just as the rooms are divided into various functions, so too her music is divided into various genres. So you can see her Latin soul, Lopez dancing Jennifer's rooms. The video as a whole operates as a record of a navigational session within multiple nested interface frames, one of which is called Internet TV, again, anticipating technological convergence, which is yet to arrive. I think the most salient comparison here, though, is with the web itself. So the ways in which we see the interface dividing up content into sights and sounds, chats, links. As I said, this video preceded her own website. So why did the video's producers feel the need to hire a production company to create a fictional interface in their attempt to invoke the World Wide Web? Why not just use the web? There are lots of browsers in 1999. Why make a new one? The producers said really explicitly on their website, the contemporary web-savvy audience require, quote, realistic interfaces to create verisimilitude. In other words, for the virtual to look realistic, interfaces have to look like they could be real as well. And in this case, real interfaces or browsers like Explorer, Netscape, or AOL just won't do. Band by the Ranch, who made this interface for the video, also made something called NetBot, which was used for, you can see it up on the upper left-hand corner, which was developed originally for the hit youth film American Pie. And they talk about how software is a key aspect of a televisual image's believability. So the way in which this screen divides up the different modes of performance is, of course, very racialized. And what's interesting is that articulating these musical genres highlights the star's diversity, which is really ironic. Unlike most of Lopez's other songs, If You Had My Love borrows liberally from all genres, but doesn't belong to any genre at all except for pop, and works as a way to sell and brand otherwise really unidentifiable music, very important when half of all music that is listened to is not sold, but rather shared or stolen. The Latin soul sequence, launched when the male viewer clicks on the link, depicts Lopez in a short, tight white dress as she performs flamenco arm movements and so on. We are switched from one mode of racialization to another at the viewer's pleasure. Lopez's readiness to fill different musical, national, and ethnic niches reflects the logic of the video and its interfaces and its audiences. As she moves through from cornrowed hip-hop girl, the house one, with baggy pants and tight shirts, to high-heeled Latina diva, to generic pop star with straightened hair and yoga pants, we see the movement as well between identities that characterizes her construction in the video as a digital media object of interactivity. If I had more time as well, I'd talk about the cutscenes, which function just like cutscenes in video games. It's this interrupted moment in which we see all that sort of gray, chunky stuff flying at us, and it comes back together in the shape of the star's body. This is supposed to represent the way data looks as it's streaming into your computer and becoming something. This kind of interlude, I think, of digital formation makes very obvious the way the colored and gendered body comes together from undifferentiated pixels of visual noise at the pleasure of the viewer and forms images of race, color, and nation playing particular roles and performing particular work in the context of new media. Like J-Lo, Filipino and Russian internet brides are also clickable, women who can be randomly accessed via the web. Their performances outline are certainly different in kind and quality from that of the site's designer or user. Their job is to perform a kind of racialized submission to the viewer's interactive gaze and to the geopolitical state of things, which compels this kind of identity performance. So I'm finishing up by talking about the visual culture of the female object of interactivity, which is yet to be written. I think most of the scholarship really is about the agency of the user and not a lot about what is being used. So that's the end.
Next up is Michael Curry.
Okay. Thanks very much for having me. By way of I think, a very brief introduction. I'm very much interested in issues having to do with space and place, and particularly with the ways in which everyday activities occur and essentially occur within particular places or particular kinds of places. Right now I'm working on a book with my colleague Leah Livro from UCLA on places for reading anonymously, where we argue that a right to read anonymously is really essential to the possibility of free inquiry. And we note that organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union, the American Library Association, talk about the need for free inquiry. They talk about intellectual freedom and implicitly about the need to be able to read anonymously, but they never talk about the need for places where one can read anonymously. We're working on a book about changes in the places where one can read anonymously over the last 100 years or so. So as I read this paper, and indeed I will read this paper, you'll see some echoes of that project in it. But this paper that I'm going to be reading today comes more directly out of a couple of articles and book chapters that I've written over the last year or so, one on airline security systems, one on radio frequency ID tags, and one rather different one on changing ideas of what the history of spatial information systems might look like. So, to the chase. The promise of provenance, networks, narratives, and the new model of object management. My alliteration just got out of control in this title, but I couldn't stop myself. Okay. There's for a long time, one's tempted to say from the beginning, been among users of geographic information systems, and I hope you all have a kind of a vague sense of geographic information systems, which are in a sense computerized mapping systems and computerized data systems. There's for a long time been among users of geographic information systems a conventional history of the systems, one that appeals to a particular way of thinking about space and place. One thinks of the world as a kind of spatial plane and imagines the possibility of creating a representation that maps onto it, hence a map. And it's imagined that that map can be decomposed into layers, referring back to conventional regional geographies, almost every regional geography you would ever read, assuming you needed to read regional geographies. Those layers often include the physical, then the biological, then the demographic, the social, the economic, and finally the cultural. Cultural always sort of floats to the top, and capital C culture is above lowercase c culture. In the late 1960s, Ian McHarg, famous landscape architect from Penn, articulated this particular ontology in his influential Design with Nature. And though McHarg's pre-computer layers were made of mylar rather than bits, the image of the history of geographic information systems as a history of layers has persisted. The persistence of this story of what GIS is about, embedded in texts and introductory GIS and advertising, and some would claim in the hardware and software itself, has had a number of functions. One has been to support a kind of GIS exceptionalism, wherein spatial information is claimed to be the special turf of the geographer and of his or her kin. Geographers are always worried that their departments are going to be closed down, and they're always looking for the magic bullet that's going to make them powerful, and GIS is seen as the latest version of that. But another and more significant function of this history has been to obscure much that is interesting and important about the development of the systems, and in particular about the broader place of locational technologies in the world. I'll suggest here that we need to rethink the history of geographic information systems, and in a dramatic way. Indeed, it seems to me that it's no longer useful to see them as having anything like an independent history. I gave an earlier version of this paper at the Geographers' annual meetings a couple of months ago, and I said that, and there was this from the audience. The clicking, the cocking of revolvers. Rather, we need to see geographic information systems as merely a small part of systems whose function is what I term object management, or perhaps more sardonically, inventory control. Within these systems, the stuff that populates the earth, people, other living things, and objects, comes to constitute a gigantic inventory that can be tracked and managed, sort of the world as Walmart. Object management is not, of course, new. One might, in fact, think of it as being as old as identity and identification. But it has evolved through a series of phases, and today, really quite recently, I think, we see the development of a new phase. Perhaps surprisingly, this new object management, in an important respect, returns to and relies upon one of the oldest means of identification, a means that sees narrative as a critical element of any certain identification. At the same time, this new object management system views the layer, the idea that was seen as central to the development and utility of geographic information systems, as only one of several possible ways in which spatial matters might come into play. Indeed, the new system is based upon the notion that recent developments in locational technologies and in networking and sensor systems have at once rendered the idea of the layer largely obsolete and at the same time brought to bear a richer set of spatial concepts in supporting this new form of object management. In what follows, I'll briefly sketch what I take to be some critical moments in the long story of object management. For the sake of brevity, simplifying that history, I'll describe 3 eras: an early, perhaps pre-systematic era of object management, a second era dominated by what I'll call the traditional model, and the current era of an emerging new model for object management. Okay, precursors. It's a commonplace that people have for a very long time been able to distinguish one person, object, or place from another. What is less clear, though, and what's been the object of considerable inquiry, is how that process of distinguishing actually works. In the case of people, Zygmunt Bauman has noted that the idea that individuals have identities is rather new. Before the 18th century, he argues, everyday life was largely a local matter, where people lived out their lives in close proximity. There, as he put it, inside that network of familiarity from the cradle to the coffin, each person's place was too evident to be pondered. So to say that identity was not an issue is to say that individuals did not, as a matter of course, imagine that some set of physical characteristics, predispositions, or other attributes could or should be grouped together into a single thing called an identity that could then be seen as capturing what was essential about a particular person. It's to say that the process of classification that we take for granted was not in play. Similarly, when we turn to the world of objects and events, before Aristotle, it had surely been common enough to discuss the relationship among phenomena, as, for example, between lightning and thunder, classic example. But what was missing was a systematic move from the unreflective lightning then thunder to a naming of that relationship, and then to Aristotle's meta-level analysis in which the wide range of relationships among phenomena were sorted into the 4 basic forms of explanation, and in which a split between the signifier and the signified was affected. And while it's common enough to imagine that locations or places all exist within some larger and containing space, one that can be defined in mathematical terms, the grid, latitude, longitude, Euclidean space, this way of thinking needs also to be seen as rather new, and as having emerged in the wake of the emergence of the map and other such enabling technologies. Before those technological developments, knowledge about places was not unsystematic, but was by and large embedded not in the map, but in narrative and symbol. Indeed, to distinguish as I have here among systems for the identification of people, objects, and places is in a way to commit an error. For if people were largely embedded in networks of familiarity, those networks included people and objects, and those networks relied upon understandings of what's where, what belongs where, and what is in place and what is out of place. In an important sense, what replaced this earlier view and the system that came to be embedded in geographic information systems is very much of a piece with what is usually termed modernism. I have no intention, you'll be relieved to hear, of rehearsing the details of modernism here, but will instead point to 2 of its features that are rejected in the move to what I term the new object management. First, it involves the view that identity can be laid out in terms of a relationship between substance and attribute. Identification works through a process of classification. In picking out a particular individual, I rely on a description, a set of attributes. In a process that might best be seen as relying on a model of Venn diagrams or perhaps set theory, I pick out the set of individuals who have the first attribute, then the second attribute, then the third one, and so on and so on. The ones who are included in the intersection of all of those sets can be said to fit the profile in question. I'm talking about profiling here in a sense. And when only one person meets those criteria, classification becomes individual identification. At the same time, this conventional view tends to treat location as a matter that is uncontroversial. If, as Bauman suggests, the modern notion of identity emerged in the 18th century, and if it came to fruition in the 19th century, in the era that brought us what Ian Hacking has so memorably termed an avalanche of numbers, This was also the period in which we saw both the gridding of the landscape and the development of large-scale mapping operations all over the world. Hence, the objects and individuals that populated the world could now, at least in principle, be characterized in terms of their locations in the world, but it came to be common to see particular locations as differing in no essential way one from another. So in this traditional system, places don't differ qualitatively one from another. In both ways, the identity of an individual came to be defined by the intersection of a set of attributes, personal and locational. But left unanswered was the question of how to achieve certainty in identification. And certainty turns out to be the big issue in what I'm calling the new model. Here, I think, a brief philosophical interlude will be helpful in making sense of the move from this traditional or modernist sense of object management to what I've termed the new object management. I don't mean to suggest that because this or that philosopher said something, we should all believe it. If that world worked that way, we'd all want to be philosophers, and thank God we're not. Rather, I think it's useful to view philosophers as the most conservative of individuals, and to see them as willing to make a claim about the world only once the phenomena that they are describing seems an incontrovertible part of the common sense furniture of the world. I begin with Frege, who might be seen as representative of the traditional model. In his 1892 Sense and Reference, really his seminal work, dealing with the question of identity, he argued that a proper name has both a sense and a reference, or as John Stuart Mill had said before, a connotation and a denotation. So now we're talking about the earliest discussion of these terms. Frege claimed that it's the sense of a proper name that allows us to fix its reference, to figure out who we're referring to. I can pick out Bill Clinton because I know things about him. So some set of attributes, what Bowman thought of as an identity, is used as a means of picking out or referring to the particular. Frege noted that there's a rub in this way of thinking about things. In some cases, I may be able to pick out an individual or object even where almost nothing that I know about it is true. His solution was to suggest that a particular proper name will have a complex sense, consisting of a set of properties. In attempting to pick out a particular object, we measure the object against those properties. Where most of the properties, not necessarily all of them, apply, we say that the concept or name applies. I know that a certain set of attributes that define a terrorist, and this is the subtext of this whole paper, define a terrorist, so I take those attributes, apply them to the population at hand, and where there's a close match, I identify that person as a terrorist. Since Frege, many people have argued that this analysis is just too wishy-washy. It seems they suggest not really to capture the certainty that people have when they identify someone within their network of familiarity. Taking seriously that critique, in 1972, Saul Kripke, in Naming and Necessity, offered an alternative analysis, one that claimed that Frege had gotten it all wrong and hence so had the traditional system of object management. Criticizing the view that reference is fixed by appeal to some cluster of descriptions or attributes, Kripke dismissed that view as having nothing to do with what really happens. Rather, he suggested, and then here are two long quotes, someone, let's say a baby, is born. His parents call him by a certain name. They talk about him to their friends. Other people meet him. Through various sorts of talk, the name is spread from link to link as if by a chain. A speaker who is on the far end of this chain, who has heard about, say, Richard Feynman, the baby in question, in the marketplace or elsewhere, may be referring to Richard Feynman even though he can't remember from whom he first heard of Feynman or from whom he ever heard of Feynman. He doesn't have to know the details about Feynman, according to Kripke. But instead, he says, a chain of communication going back to Feynman himself has been established by virtue of his membership in a community, which passed the name from link to link, not by a ceremony that he makes in his study. There he's thinking about the older view. Kripke, in this work, was hailed by some as having come up with the first new philosophical innovation since Aristotle, or as I've put it elsewhere, since Aristotle provided over the forgetting of how identification actually works. The view of identification and of the means of achieving certainty, which is really what Kripke is interested in, that Kripke laid out is right at the heart of the new object management. It guarantees certainty by tracking the person or object in question, from the coffin back to the cradle. Central to the traditional system was a process of profiling, which often had difficulty dealing with the question of whether attributes were essential or only accidental features of the identity of an individual or group. At the same time, at the heart of the traditional system for object management was the dislocation of the object. The location of a person or object was seen as in some fundamental way separable from the object or its identity. And one could in principle identify that object or person without having knowledge of where it was or where it had ever been. And these two facts are, Kripke suggests, at the root of uncertainty in identification. Indeed, within the new object management system, where something is and was comes to be an essential or intrinsic part of that object. One does not identify a person as a terrorist by developing a profile consisting of attributes like age, gender, ethnicity, religion, income, membership, criminal convictions, and so on. Rather, one traces an individual's activities back in time. Where has he lived? Where has he worked? Where did he attend meetings of a religious group? But also, where did he shop? What places did he visit? How did he get there? This is just the beginning. Actually, let me give you an aside. Last summer I needed to buy some toner for my laser printer. And I wasn't at home in New Jersey. I was in fact in Vermont, at the place we have in Vermont. I wanted it to be shipped there. So I looked on the internet, I found toner. I found out it'd be cheaper to buy a new printer than to buy a thing of toner. Figure it out, it's like $20 cheaper. So I ordered it online, and in order to have it delivered to a new place, they gave me a little test of my identity. And they asked me a series of questions. Do you own a home at, and then they gave me places, LA, I teach at UCLA, Highland Park, New Jersey, where my wife and I live, some other place, and some other place. So I got that one right. And they asked me how much the mortgage was. My wife always pays the mortgage, so I wasn't entirely sure. I guessed. I think I got that one right. They asked when we had bought the house. I got that one wrong, I think. And then they asked me about, it was before my wife and I were together. And then the fourth thing they asked me was if a particular address, if I connected it with which of four places. And the places were Los Angeles, Chicago, Highland Park, New Jersey, and some other city. So I got that one wrong. So I failed. They weren't going to send me the new printer. Then they called me up, and the woman who called up was very nice, and she gives me the same test again. And and she says, she goes down the list, and she says, okay, does 5412 Ingleside Avenue remind you of which city? And she says, Los Angeles, Highland Park, New Jersey, Chicago, and something else. And I thought, I don't know. And then she says, she gives me a hint. Have you ever lived in Chicago? They're really worried about security. And it suddenly occurred to me, yeah, in 1984, I lived at 5412 Ingleside in Chicago. So, my ability to prove who I was dependent on, absent a little cheating on the part of the place at the Computer Geeks where I was buying this printer. My ability to prove who I was relied on my ability to remember where I had lived 20 years before, and indeed, I couldn't remember, actually. Okay. So this is what this is really about. So the next step in the analysis is to repeat this process of collection of information for people already known to be terrorists and for others so suspected. The identification of the person in question as a terrorist rests upon the finding of points of intersection between the two biographies, between the two chains running backwards. Did this person fly in an airplane with someone known to be a terrorist? Did they share an apartment? Did they communicate by telephone or by email? But as Kripke has noted, if the system is to create certainty, there needs to be a sense that the chain from the present to the past is unbroken. Here, Kripke, of course, is echoing the admonition in Descartes that in making judgments, one needs to avoid conceptual leaps, to make each step as small and as explicit as possible. Or, as they used to say in ninth grade geometry, show your work. So how does this work? What determines that one gap in knowledge is so small that it does not admit of the introduction of uncertainty? At what point can we feel justified in moving from Smith occupied seat 36C in United Flight 81 on September 11th, and Jones occupied seat 36B on United Flight 81 on September 11th, to Smith and Jones traveled together? Here, Kripke relied on a common sense embedded within dense social networks. As is so typical of Anglo-American philosophy, his analysis was not tainted by a mention of technology. But in fact, common sense is, in the real world of 2005, joined by technological devices, and in particular by information networks and new sensors and data capture devices. Here, locational technologies of the sorts that are at the heart of geographic information systems have seemed to some people to be able to bridge the smallest of gaps, to trace an individual's actions in such detail that only insignificant gaps remain. At the same time, networking has seemed to create the promise of following that person or object in real time, rather than through a process of after-the-fact data mining. So in a technologically mediated life, where transactions are frequent and monitored, it has indeed seemed possible to some that one might, for any particular individual, be able to play the video in reverse, to follow the individual from the coffin to the cradle, and thereby to determine whether he truly presents a risk as a potential airline passenger, mortgage holder, laser printer purchaser, or spouse. Here, though, it's probably worth recalling Wittgenstein's description of the ways in which people deal with these little gaps, how they piece together the sometimes disparate and seemingly disconnected parts of a social situation. Criticizing Fraser's analysis of the Beltane Festival and the Golden Bough, I had a person in my MA committee who he was a Crowberian cultural anthropologist, and somebody in class one day asked him about the value of the Golden Bough, and he said, it's like this thick. He said, "Great doorstop." Anyway, writing about Fraser's analysis of the Beltane Festival, he noted, "That which I see in those stories is something they acquire, after all, from the evidence, including such evidence as does not seem directly connected with them," all kinds of stuff, "from the thought of a man in his past, from the strangeness of what I see in myself and others, what I have seen and have heard. This piecing together, this creation of narrative from chronology, is very much a matter of the construction of an account of the kinds of things and people and activities that go together, and that go together in certain places. It's a construction of what is to count as common sense, and it is at the same time one that relies on common sense. And so it's worth reminding ourselves that the certainty within judgments about, for example, the identification of terrorists or potential spouses can be said to move beyond the uncertainties of the profiles at the heart of the traditional model of object management, only to the extent that we are prepared to accept as gospel the everyday narratives that we use to organize our lives. Thank you.
It can be? Yeah.
Chris, I really enjoyed your paper, and there's much to worry about in the Jennifer Lopez video, and in some of the ways the categorization and mapping happens with sort of very internet technologies. I'm wondering about the model of webcams as they're cited by Lopez and by her sort of production crew. And I'm wondering, given the sort of kind of conception of sort of the webcam operator and sort of my webcam, and the rules of webcams in relationship potentially to the rules of her song, I'm wondering if it's a mistake to imagine Lopez only as the object of the gaze with no control of the technology, but rather a kind of ambivalent or split state where she's both very much objectified and offering herself for the gaze, at the same time as if it's a webcam technology, and the sort of webcams now, sort of multiple webcams, that they're going to give you the whole house. She quotes many of the things, and that to some extent, she controls her own visibility. And she decides to be both a kind of active mover through the representational space and in control of her eroticism. So I'm wondering the way she sort of pushes back controls the technology. And I mean, one of the sort of creepier things for me is how she teaches the young girl to model certain kinds. So sort of a representational pushing back as well as contained.
That would be the more optimistic reading, I think. I'm reminded of the little Logitech webcam that a lot of us bought in the 90s. It looked like the sun in a dollar bill. It was a sphere on a triangle, and that's been supplanted by the trendier iSight, which is a kind of silver cylinder that you clip on top of your Macintosh. And it's basically, you know, those are the two kind of models of consumer webcams. It seems really pointed that what's shown in this video is very much a surveillance camera that you would see in a public space. So when we have reality television, which is showing different rooms of houses like Big Brother, which I've actually never seen, but which invokes this idea of domestic surveillance, I don't know what kind of equipment they use, but maybe it's something that's sort of in between these two kinds of devices. I mean, the webcam that you buy at Best Buy is very much a device of, you know, DIY broadcasting. You know, you buy that because you want to condition the transmission of your own self-representation. And they're little, you know, they're these kind of intimate, personal, small kinds of things that people accessorize their computers with. It seems that what's in that video is really big. It's sort of big and it's black and it's very institutional looking, and the user is controlling it with a joystick, kind of in this moment of telepresence. So I saw that as a moment that could have been very much about Lopez negotiating her representation a little more, because the iconography for that does exist. You know, there's lots of work out now on women and webcams, JennyCam, and how, you know, what an interesting, but ultimately kind of disappointing movement that was, because oftentimes these are people just wanting to get a glimpse of a naked body, right? But I think that the video is really knowing about technology, and it chose not to invoke that particular image of webcam. So I didn't read it that way, but I'm not done with this, obviously, and I think that it would be important to try and read more agency back into it, because she produced the video. You know, she didn't direct it, but definitely she's very much in control. I mean, Jennifer Lopez, like Madonna, has been known for somebody who has a lot of input into her image. So.
I have a question for Joe. During the Dean campaign, from my perspective anyway, a lot of the fundraising actually occurred at the house parties as well. That there was organization of actual bodies getting together in a place and looking at a Dean video or watching an interview with Dean on TV or something like that. And that became an opportunity for small fundraising. And at recently in Texas, the legislature is trying to pass a bill to remove foster children from any households with a gay and lesbian caretaker. Right. And so this raised, you know, alarms, and you know, we got all of 30 people down at the state capitol to protest this, and I thought, you know, the religious right could get could get busloads of people from all over Texas here for this. So what the two things I'm getting at is that there's what kind of you know, social organizing has to go on? You know, what kind of political networks, existing political and cultural networks, are going to be able to use and take advantage of the type of electronic and communication networks that you
espouse? Well, the one thing that the networks take time to build. I mean, you can't just tomorrow morning say, "Hey, we're going to."
Some people have them already. I mean, the Christian right.
Oh no, they've been building them for 40 years. Right. I mean, and so part of the thing is, look, they've been building these networks for 40 years, and we decide we need to build something so that we can all get together in Texas and protest something. And you know, you can't just turn the switch on and tomorrow morning more than 30 people show up. It takes time to build them. We were at a point, early on where there were 432 known supporters nationwide of the Dean campaign. I mean, 432 known people around this country. His mother did not know he was running for president of the United States. Well, she knew, but she didn't think it was, some great idea. We decided 2 days later that we want everybody to come to Burlington, Vermont, and say that we're against the war. There's no way for those 432 people to do anything. Now, I go back to Texas, though. The interesting thing that happened in Texas, in Austin, Texas, was we had 481 people. This is later on in the campaign. We now have 481 people on our list of people who are supporting us in Austin. And we emailed them that the governor was coming on 2 Thursdays down the road, about 2 weeks later, and said, we're coming and we want to do this thing in the park, and, please come. And we think at the time we're emailing 431 people. Hell, if half of them show up, be 200 people, we'd be, that'd be a great thing. Instead, we got to the park and there were 3,200 people there, and that wasn't our count. That was AP and the 3 local stations. What we found out had happened was when we emailed the 481 saying he's coming, 2 of those people sent an email out to the 481 saying, if he's coming, why don't we all get together at my house and see and talk about what we can do. Well, the first problem was 100 people showed up at that guy's house. He thought 10 or 15 people would come, we'd sit in the living room. They ended up moving it to the backyard. They decided they were going to leaflet the entire Latino community of Austin, Texas. And there was some special election in Austin of 50 polling places, and there were 100 of them, so they said, you two take that one, you two take that one. And they leafleted outside of the 50 polling places on that Tuesday with leaflets that said Howard Dean's going to be here in 2 days. So what ends up happening is this small network of 481 people jump offline and actually do something. And this was one of the big organizational questions in politics. Everybody knew that the people were sitting behind their machines and they could connect that way, but could you get them from out behind the machine and actually go out and do something, and not just click and send $25 right there because it's easy, but go do something. In the Dean campaign, that actually started happening to the tune of, my guess is that day in Austin, half the crowd was Latino, and over half of them did not own a computer. And we know that because we sent clipboards, old-fashioned way, clipboards through the crowd asking people to sign and give us their email address, and they would sign up and say, don't have a computer. And and so part of this is it's using the net. The technology lets people become activated and go leap off and do something else. Once we realized that model, we started doing this all over the country. That's the Sleepless Summer Tour that we did in August. It was, I think, kind of seen as one of the more fantastic things that's ever happened in presidential politics, was us just emailing the 4,000 people that we knew we had in Seattle saying we're coming, and all of a sudden 15,000 people showed up. So one, it takes time, but 2, there's no, the other side understands the importance of building networks and has way before the technology. The Democratic side, the progressive side, has no clue about the importance of doing that. And so it's going to take a while, I think, until you see the progressive side catch up.
Okay, thanks. There's a question back, and then Chica.
I'm going to start with a question for Lisa, but I have one for each of the panelists. The first one is related to the question that was asked earlier, and that's the question of J.Lo's agency, or how does that look at in the video. And what struck me as important is that we see the sort of sleazy guy, and he's the object of our gaze for a good portion of the video. And so that would seem to be contrary to a lot of classical film theory per se, although not, because film theory's moved on since then. But maybe that's a place where you could sort of talk through the importance of that. And also, she seems to, in her video, even sort of thematically, also have a real anxiety about the internet, too. It's like, don't cheat on me. Don't download my music without paying for it. I mean, if you really love me, you pay for it. There seems to be like this other sort of current happening there. And in terms of Michael Kerr's paper, I really, first of all, I enjoyed all your papers. And I really liked the distinction that you were talking about in terms of the new era. And I kept thinking about what people are calling the CSI effect, where juries are no longer satisfied with deduction, but want some sort of forensic identification. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how race operates in this sort of new age of tracing, and this would be a way to get your two papers to talk to each other. And then my last question is to Joe Trippi. And I found it really interesting that you were talking about the internet bringing about bottom-up power change. But the last example you gave us was arguably very top-down, right? The president is going to give his healthcare plan to the people, right? And then we are then going to discuss it, become the biggest lobbyists, and then move back up. And so I was thinking, what would a bottom-up version of that look like? Do you think it's possible that all these people would come together somehow, come up with our own healthcare plan, and then move it up? Or is there some sort of working of power hierarchy still in place in the examples you're giving us?
You guys want to take those in order, or?
Yeah, I think the history of cinema is a history of sleazy guys, in a way, right? I mean, the theory of the gaze is that, you know, parsing what the sleazy gaze is doing with the image when it sees it. I think that J-Lo knows that people download her music, as you say. I mean, that's just a reality of music today. As you were saying, the Napsterization of culture. It's not going to change back. There's nothing you can do about that. And so being a multimedia star means selling other things which can't be downloaded, like perfume, or like clothing, or cross-marketing yourself in this way, across the virtual and the real, I think. As far as the connection between race and CSI, I don't watch CSI, but this brings me to a question I wanted to ask Michael as well about identification, which is that lately on TV and film, I've seen that identification is operationalized in terms of a number. So while you're emphasizing narrative as being the way to understand identification, it seems like when we see it on televisual screens, it's always 98% positive or 50% positive, the assumption being that there are discrete points of comparison which may or may not match, which can add up to a number. And so it seems in your example as well, you were asked for data about your life, not a story in a way, which you could have said, well, you know, it felt this way to live in Vermont in the summer, right? But rather information, or kind of operationalizing of your life, which is not how we remember our lives, right? These are the salient aspects of life, which is why your story is funny. I mean, you're asked to remember basically trivia about yourself. So, yeah, I don't know how to speak to race, but I assume that it's one of those points which is then totaled with other points to make this number, which is never, it seems often not 100%, right? It can never be a positive identification, but anyway.
Yeah, so let's see, two things about race. Two things. I started out thinking about this issue by thinking about profiling and geodemographic profiling, which is used for determining who to send junk mail to, for example. And this, I guess, is almost a kind of just an aside. The biggest company the most famous geodemographic company, Claritas, which has been doing geodemographic marketing data systems for about 30 years, uses numerical taxonomy and just divides the country up into depends on which system you look at, about 60 different kinds of neighborhoods. And when they first laid out these 60 different kinds of neighborhoods, they laid them out demographically, but they didn't mention race at all, or ethnicity. It was just as though everybody was a kind of a gray white. So they would have education, income, age, things like that, how you work, family composition, household composition. They never had race. Finally, as I followed their work over about 15 years, finally in I think 1995, they began to use race, but under race there would be race equals B. or W or H. So it was like they decided they wanted to use race, but they couldn't bring themselves to use the whole word. And then a couple of years later, they finally actually spelled out the words. You knew that they had all the racial data, but they were afraid to use it. So this is a system that's used, in political campaigns as well as in marketing soap and things like that. So it's always been contentious there. Of course, one of the reasons, and this is the second more probably important point, one of the reasons that people have wanted to move to this sort of Kripke, coffin to cradle system is because of complaints about racial profiling. Complaints after 9/11, complaints after the Oklahoma City bombing, that people were using racial profiling as a marker. In fact, though, if you look at the history of airline surveillance system, you find that race has always been a marker for picking out people who are going to be given extra attention as they try to get on an airplane. So the idea with this new kind of system, and just as a brief aside, this is like a really short version of a much longer paper, one system that uses this sort of coffin to cradle thing is called NORA, Non-Obvious Relationship Awareness, which was set up by a company in Las Vegas that was funded by a CIA startup. And they started out trying to find people cheating at cards, and they did their analysis just in the way that I've described. You follow chains of people back, you see who stopped and talked to who on the floor. Casinos are always under video surveillance and so on. This is now, the NORA system is now been sold to IBM. But this is really the model, and it's a model that people have been using in airlines, and it's built in a certain way to secure flight. But the thing about this new system is, and this is really the root of my comment about common sense, is you don't have all the data. There always really are gaps, and indeed there always are large gaps. And the way you fill in those gaps, you have a piece of data about what happened here, and you have a piece of data about where I was an hour later. The way that you fill in those gaps is related to common sense, but it's also, I think, implicitly or inevitably related to a common sense that includes judgments about race. So there's a claim that these new systems get away from race, but just by the way that you fill in the gaps in the data and by the way that you analyze the smallest steps in which people are engaged, you introduce race back through a kind of a back door.
What I was trying to make the case for is that, in my view, as the bottom becomes more empowered, the top, a president, for instance, the successful corporations, the successful leaders and politicians are going to be those that come up with ways to empower the bottom. In other words, so him sending his health care plan to the folks and saying, you decide, and not the lobbyists, not you. You're empowered to make the decision. Is one that's that type of communication is likelier to succeed in the future than the way we do it today. To answer your question about can people do it themselves without that, of course, that's what I think. Two people tomorrow morning could start a website that just said, the two of us are going to take the following pledge. We refuse to support a politician, refuse to vote for one who accepts more than $100, over $100 from anybody. I mean, you take a $500 check from somebody, we won't do it. Now, they could just be two people, but if 5 more people say, yeah, I'm going to do that too, and that idea starts to virally spread and within the community grows, and suddenly there's 10 million Americans who've actually signed a pledge online that they will not support anybody who runs for office that accepts over $100. The two parties have a major problem because the middle is not ideological anymore. That middle that they're fighting for is not left or right. It's about it's about reforming the campaign finance system. I'd argue that those two people who started that site end up having more power and actually create more change than Senator McCain and Senator Feingold, who were at the top and try to fix the system, and you can't fix it. So I think those are the kinds of things that you're going to see happen. And it also has some ramifications for global leadership because, in my view, you're going to see very small countries like Finland actually be able to mobilize lots of people around the globe to get active about global warming or some other global issue, saying we're not going to wait for the U.S. or some other, Britain or some other. We, Finland, are doing this program. Join it. Urge your government to join it. And so you start seeing more of an impact from the bottom, and suddenly it's the EU presidency of Finland that actually has more of an impact on an issue like global warming than asking the American citizens to sign the Kyoto Treaty because your government won't. I'd be very interested in seeing how many Americans would go and sign it, and what the impact of millions of Americans signing the Kyoto Treaty, even though Bush or whoever's. I'm not trying to pick on ideologically here. I'm just saying I think you're going to see these kinds of things occur. Politically, I do think corporate-wise it's going to have some effects along the same kind of lines. I'll give you one example of the difference between the Dean campaign and other campaigns, and sort of getting something you were talking about true interactivity and things. The blogosphere is creating a real interactive thing, a communication between people. And I want to give you one example, and then I'll shut up on the question. But we thought we were so proud of ourselves because one day we put up 50 signs on the internet that say, Iowa for Dean, New Hampshire for Dean. And we're the first campaign in history that you don't have to go to the headquarters. You just print a full color sign on your printer or take it to File Kinko's and print it up. We put that thing up in 3 minutes after we announced it on the site and put them up. Someone came on our blog and said, you guys are complete idiots because Puerto Rico votes for the Democratic nomination and you guys don't have a Puerto Rico for Dean sign up. Now we immediately said, thanks so much, we didn't realize our mistake. I yelled at the webmaster to cut and paste, take the Iowa sign down, cut and paste Puerto Rico up, and put it up. 8 thank yous from Puerto Rico. Then we get, you idiots, there's from a guy in London, there's 6 million Democrats abroad, and you don't have a Democrats abroad for Dean sign up there. Fix it. So we fixed it. The thank you came from a woman in Spain. Thank you, I'm a Democrat abroad in Spain. I now have one too. And so what I'm saying, what was going on in our campaign was we were doing two-way interactive communication with people out there. And not only that, they knew we were actually listening to them. I mean, they caught, and so you start getting into this thing where the 60 people in Burlington turn out to not be the smartest 60 people in the world. They cannot compete with 650,000 brains out there looking at what we're doing and actually telling us when we made, it's going sort of a Linux Microsoft model of making an operating system that works. And so we constantly were having that interaction. And the one that really stands out in my mind was we were trying to raise $1 million during the Sleepless Summer Tour, 10 stops in 4 days. We're not going to make it. We only have $900,000 up, and there's an hour left. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if it took you 3 days and 23 hours to raise $900,000, 100's not coming in the last 45 minutes. And I'm standing in a New York deli 45 minutes before the governor's going on in New York, which is where we have to have the $1 million by the time we get there. And my webmaster calls me up and says, a guy in Tucson just said on the blog that he'll give $10 more. He's tapped out, he's given everything he can, but he'll do it one more time if Governor Dean will walk onto that stage with a red bat and hold the red bat up and just say in front of C-SPAN and CNN and everybody, you did it. So I turned to the hapless staffer, Matt Vogel, who was standing next to me, and just said the immoral words, go get a red bat. And he goes running around and finds a red bat, and 45 minutes later, we put out the word, we agree. thousands of people are now saying, I'm in too, thanks for listening to us. And the governor walks on at exactly 10 o'clock, they got us to $1,003,000 at exactly 10, right when we needed it. And he walked out on stage with a red bat and said, you did it. Now, my guess is that millions of Americans watching CNN, C-SPAN, MSNBC, and Fox right at that moment, because they were all covering it live, had no idea what the hell the governor was talking about. But there were thousands and thousands of people who realized that they saw on our blog 45 minutes before an anonymous, I mean not anonymous, but somebody no one knew in Tucson, Arizona say, hey, do a red bat. And it wasn't Joe Trippi, it wasn't some staffer, it was the candidate for president of the United States saying, I heard you, I'm doing it. And you actually, there was like an ownership quality that was created during this two-way communication that not just this event, but every day in the campaign, we were a totally different campaign because of the way we were interacting with our supporters. And I think that is something that you're going to see more of.
Okay, thanks. Chico is next, and then a couple questions over here.
So, Mr. Joe, perhaps all the papers here are fantastic, but speaking from an outsider perspective, who is a bit ignorant of the American system of politics. But for what you discover, described here, it seems to me that this is somebody who also people are not interested in that, if you like, the underclass type of rise to power, or there is something that went wrong midway. That's one part of the question. And the other one, perhaps, you made mention of the guy on your THQ side, where you had to fundraise for. And from a cultural perspective or an international community, what you really attributed to, if that gentleman had been somebody outside mainstream Western society, do you think he would have done the same thing? These are the two questions I've got.
On the second one, yeah, I think that guy, regardless of who he was, he had made such a connection. What I was trying to stress was there's the two-way communication that was occurring on that board made him everybody's best friend. A phenomenon in the Dean campaign that points to this, we had 190,000 people who met once a month using the internet. They would agree to meet, and they'd pick a place, and they'd all go meet. 190,000 people did that once a month, first Wednesday of every month. Dean gets out of the race, and 165,000 people continued to meet on the first Wednesday of every month after, this is before he's DNC, he's dead, they're still meeting. Why? Because I think I was still hoping for a date with the woman that, things like that where different social glue was happening in those meetings that community was forming. And so, yeah, I think members of that community would have done, if the person had become a real member of that community, yes. What went wrong? Look, the reality is that the Dean campaign should have been dead about 3 weeks after he got in the race. And, everything was stacked against him and the campaign from the beginning. It's more, I'd use a baseball analogy. It was not a miracle that the Boston Red Sox came back in the bottom of the ninth to beat the bad news Vermont Little League Bears. The miracle was that the power of the community we were building was so strong, it actually carried this Little League team into the ninth inning, the days before Iowa, and almost pulled it off. A lot of that has two things. First of all, we are, in my view, in the nascent stages of this, and I would put you sort of akin to the period where the American people were glued to their radios, and television was this newfangled thing that not too many people hadn't penetrated at the time into changing people's power structure a lot. And you had in the early '60s, you have people listening to the Nixon-Kennedy debate, believing Nixon won the debate. People watching it on television, and Kennedy won the debate. That was probably happening at a time just as television was getting a stronger power hold. The net is back in the 1950s in terms of a TV radio thing. And so we were using a medium and a mass medium at a stage where it wasn't quite ready yet. It wasn't quite as powerful as obviously seeing him scream 931 times nationwide was able to affect millions of Americans in a different way, in a more powerful way.
Okay, thank you. Yes, in front.
This is a follow-up to some of Joe's enthusiasm about how IT are going to continue to contribute to helping people organize. I guess I'm wondering how sustainable it is after a certain level, because as more organizations and causes figure out the use of technology this way, people will still have a certain level, somewhat constant level of attention span and energy and time that they can devote to different causes. And so maybe, at that point, it was only the Dean campaign that was using this medium, but as our emails clutter with messages from various organizations requiring our attention to forward messages and show up to meetings, I wonder how well it's going to be sustainable for people to keep getting involved.
I mean, I think there's a couple things. First of all, the technology's changing drastically, and I think email as a way to organize people or to get messages across is gone and will be dead. And some things like RSS feeds, really simple syndication, and other mechanisms that are a lot more powerful and give the voter or the consumer much more power over what's coming in and what they're going to participate in, or are going to solve are already solving and will continue to solve a lot of the clutter problems. And but fundamentally, what you've watched is 40 years of a medium that was in the most powerful medium being a very isolating and passive medium. I mean, television is a very isolating and passive thing. You don't participate in it, and it's I mean, the best example I can give you is Harry Truman travels across the country on a train. He meets and talks to 18 million Americans on that train, it turns out. He got on that train, went all over the country, and it was 18 million people. Think about what had to happen. He talks to 18 million people. They had to get up out of their houses. They had to go to the train station. They stood around for an hour waiting for him to come. They talk about what's going on in the community with somebody who's standing there. He talks. They rap a little about what's going on. They leave and they go home. Literally, Ike Eisenhower is the first guy to talk to 18 million people, and it's not on a train. It's through the eye of that lens. There's no socialization at all that occurs. I mean, you're talking about maybe the wife and the husband are together when they're watching it happen. They don't talk to their neighbors about it, that kind of thing. The net is the opposite of that. People are watching Howard Dean say, "I got a red bat, you did it," and thousands of people are actually talking to each other, IMing, sending email, having a conversation on a blog. Yeah, it's not at the event. I understand that. That's a difference. But it's getting more back to that period where people are actually communicating with each other. So I think you're going to see more people get involved in things because there's a way to communicate and get attached to a movement or a cause. The problem is we're so, the Dean campaign was 650,000 people. We're talking out of 300 million. We're not talking about a lot of people being, it's not going to take a whole lot. 2 or 3 million people can change just about anything in this country if they get moving on it. So I think you're going to see that happen. I think, on a bunch of different levels.
Thanks. There's a question back, and then we'll come
So I was trying to understand whether the guy who wanted the red bat was sort of like the guy in the sleazy tank top that wanted J-Lo. And then how can we, if we have to have this chain of identification, where does that bubble of place where we can think about various things without leaving a trace of what we're thinking, so that we might self-select as opposed to having Joe's operation identify us and contact us. So I'm trying to get you all three to talk about how we're going to do politics.
I think that's a great question. It reminds me of a textbook I teach called Remediations, in which the authors Bolter and Grusin talk about the cinema of attractions and how early cinema was really about showing off that you could make images look like they were moving. And so they didn't have stories, they didn't have plots. They were usually like a train rushing towards you, right? And so the MIT coffee pot, which early net people know, right? The obsessive checking of the coffee pot. Why? Because you can, you know? Early technologies invoke this desire to use them for their own sake. It's really about the technology, not about the content. And so when you told me when you said the red bat story, I was thinking, this is very like the MIT coffee pot. The idea that you can use a back channel to get to do something in a kind of remote way, and that people are in on that as a kind of, you know, not only a sense of contact with the star, which a politician is always a star, but also the sense that you can make something happen remotely,
Right.
and only you and your friends will know about it. In a way, those, if you look at media history, those things always have a limited kind of life, because you get more used to the medium and the notion that I can look at a coffee pot anymore. That coffee pot is entirely alone today. You know, no one looks at it anymore, because the idea of liveness through that medium is very played out. I mean, people are now just trying to fend off their email. And, you know, what you say about RSS feeds reminds me, I hear people complaining about theirs now. So I don't know if that's already gone that way as well. But it seems that, you know, especially interactive technology is so much about interaction for its own sake that, you know, in a sense, it's the container and not what's inside it that seems to...
See, I just think it's the connectivity. The difference from a political perspective is it is about connecting up enough people to who are, you know, going to support somebody or support an idea. And whether it's global, look, ideas matter. I mean, your answer, question of what are people going to get involved? Ideas matter. People are going to get involved in ideas that attract them and ideas that matter to them. And, you know, there are people today who care about rock gardening, okay? I'm not interested in rock gardening, but a blog on rock gardening is going to attract a lot of rock gardeners and communicate with each other. I don't know what they're talking about, what kind of granite boulder versus, you know, but they've got their interests, and they now have a way to communicate. And in a world where all the communication has essentially been one way, a bunch of advertising agencies or whoever saying, this is what you're watching tonight, and where people finally have a way to talk back and to actually affect things, have an impact, is going to matter more. I agree that, yeah, you're only going to be able to do the red bat stunt, you know, but I'm talking more about sort of where I think this leads in terms of people actually. I mean, you know, my own view is democracy is a pretty messed up thing right now, and I can guarantee you the politicians and the corporations are not going to fix it. So either the net is a way to connect and fix it, or it isn't. I happen to take the position that I think it will, and I think there's a way to do it, and that we'll all be better for it. If I'm wrong, which I could be, admittedly, we're in for a world of hurt, because there's no way this system as it now is constructed is going to solve a single problem.
Do we have a space where we can consider unpopular ideas for ourselves without getting in trouble?
There was a case when a month or so ago in North Dakota, a number of people, 20-something people, were refused admission to a Bush rally because they belonged to a certain online list. And this, you know, this is the dark underside of the kind of thing that you're talking about. It's, you know, it really is the right to read anonymously. In this case, you know, I think of somebody like, you know, well, many of us in the room who would read or subscribe to a list because we were interested in it, and not necessarily because we believed what was there, but that inference is in a sense made for us. So it just becomes much more difficult when you're using a traceable technology, as is so much of the technology, so much of the information that you get on the web. Just much more difficult to be able to engage in this kind of activity and have a kind of a space.
And I'd add that, you know, like at least currently with the way the re-architecture of the PC and some other things that are going on, I'm talking at Intel and Microsoft, it's going to be even harder. I mean, they're going to know everything. So you know, posting anonymously is a joke. They can figure out who it is. I mean, so yeah, I think there are some real problems. But again, I don't think the top's not going to figure it out. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. I mean, it's either as they encroach more and more, enough Americans say, no, you ain't doing that. And I don't know if enough Americans will, but I'm more interested in trying to figure out how to get enough Americans to do that. From a practitioner point of view, I'm totally at a loss on the academic and sort of studies and the other important work that's going on. But I'm saying from a practitioner point of view, that's what I want to do. I want to figure that out.
One of the things that all of your talks address are issues of interactivity and the relationship between interactivity, agency, and how certain kinds of identities are produced. And I'm sort of, Lisa mentioned Tara McPherson, who started a critique of interactivity. So I'm curious about sort of the agency of certain kinds of being able to sort of respond back. We have a red bat for you, which begins to seem to address a huge mass of individuals in relationship to critiques of direct address. Amazon, Joe Trippy, we have books for you, or a television program which will say, welcome, we want to welcome you to our living room. You will talk to us. So sites like Yahoo will offer us personalization, which means that I can choose the Yahoo logo. Do I want the dog wandering in the snow? Do I want the slightly more Christmas Christian scene, or the classic Yahoo logo? So, it seems like we can change things, but what is the political advocacy and the level to which we can change? And at the same time, as it seems and we're promised that we can change the setting, Dean will walk on and do whatever we want, whatever political actions we want, how much are these stories in the end encouraging us to buy, and to buy into certain ideas, and actually shaping our identities at the same time as it seems like I've personalized Yahoo?
Well, the Dean campaign did both. First of all, politics, generally is some kind of, what do I, 10 more dollars in your pension for your vote. Okay, it's become too transactional. So in the BAT one, yeah, there, was that a game or not? And frankly, I don't know the answer to that because I just did what I did when I did it. The other ones, though, there were much more. That's like the only instance I could think of where we actually did it that way. All the other times was more like I was talking about with the signs and stuff, where people literally were just catching mistakes we made, telling us that we made them, or saying, hey, why don't you think about doing this? And it turned out it was a brilliant idea. Again, going back to the 60 people at headquarters aren't the smartest people in the world when you have all these other people working on the problem. And I think the real problem is to have true interactivity. There's got to be, and this gets to what you're getting to, there has to be somebody really listening. I think Yahoo, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They really want you to have some choice here, but they can't figure out how to listen to all those people, so they've got to give you 5 choices that they know when you click it automatically happens and it's all solved. In the Dean campaign, we literally know. We want to read what it's not pick one of these 5. Should he go here? Should he go there? Should he go to Texas? Where should we go? And what are your ideas about where we go and where that event should be? And you've got an amazing idea, and we would do it, not because you were telling us what to, and the bad thing's a different one because there was some telling us what to do, but that was very rare. That was a really smart idea. It was smarter than the campaign manager or the press secretary or anybody else, and we decided to go do it. And the difference was people really knew we were listening, and that we were hearing what they were saying, and that if it was a bad idea, we said on the site, that's not an idea. We don't really like that idea. Frank's got a good one. We're going to go do that one or whatever. And I'm just saying that, so there was an actual real exchange. I think the problem right now is most of the people at corporations, et cetera, even giving them the benefit of the doubt, which I'm not prepared to do, but giving them the benefit of the doubt, they can't figure out how to build an infrastructure to do all that listening. Because I'm telling you, their products would be better. If they knew that people were having, really thought it should be packaged this way. I mean, somebody's got a great packaging idea for Tide soap out there. They're paying zillions of dollars to experts to figure out what packaging is going to be. I'm telling you, there's somebody out there who's going to give them a better idea, but they can't capture it, and they can't. And I think I can't solve the problem for them. I know how we solved it in the Dean campaign, and how we really did work on making it truly interactive and not a menu of decisions you get to think you made, but a real interactive actual conversation, which is happening on a lot of blogs around the internet now. Those kind of conversations are happening, and the blogosphere is growing at an incredible rate. I mean, it's now near 10 million blogs and growing. And when I joined the Dean campaign, I think it was like around 400,000 worldwide. So, and it was only 7 million a month ago. So it's growing at a. The other interesting phenomenon is podcasting, which is in its early stages. It's growing faster than blogs were growing when it started out, and it's basically create your own radio show essentially, and there's no barrier to entry, and that conversation, how people are going to sift through which 200,000 or 9 million podcasting conversations are going on to get to what they want to hear. I don't know how that's going to play out, but podcasting is coming, and it's going to have, I think, a weird effect on local radio stations, because you have XM and Sirius sort of covering the nation, and now I've got my little podcast on rock gardening in Hanover, and the 9 rock gardeners in Hanover keep listening to my podcast. I mean, so I think that we're going to see, first of all, much more fragmentation of, the fragmentation we've been watching is, seeing is going to continue. And the other thing, the last thing I'd say is, when you look at this from a communications perspective, from political, is we lost. There are very few communal experiences that are not sort of television communal. I mean, everybody watches the last episode of Everybody Loves Raymond, and they all come and talk about it at work the next day and things. The interesting thing with TiVo and everything else is even that communal experience is going to change dramatically. You're going to, a couple of years from now, you're going to come into work and say, did you watch the last episode of Everybody Loves Raymond last night? And your best friend is going to say to you, no, I TiVo'd it for Thursday, don't tell me what happened. We're not having that conversation. And so you're seeing a more fragmentation and even less of an ability for us to talk about common stuff, because we're actually going to be time shifting and doing all kinds of things that are going to further fragment the way we communicate with each other. And the one interesting place where community seems to be growing is the internet. I mean, for whatever the good or bad of that, communities are growing there. They tend to be not growing and actually stalling or fragmenting further offline and through other mediums.
Michael, did you have?
Oh, can I respond to that? as well? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have time.
It strikes me when you're talking about the Jib Jab example, which I didn't see, that was a shared experience. That was its
Right.
power, but it was asynchronous. And that's what the web allows. It's time shifted already. And so I think the J-Lo example very much shows shared public experience of a common thing, right? Because people are watching together. There's 2 women watching, there's 2 mechanics watching. Maybe that's the kind of new logic of new media in terms of experiencing something together. You just don't experience it simultaneously, but you experience it the same thing, but with some kinds of perverted differences. And so I think in particular the idea of the critique of interactivity is that you don't all get the same thing, because if we did, it would be just like old media, right? We have
Right.
to have some mode of making it a little different for us, but not too different. And it strikes me that we forget sometimes that these are all kind of command and control situations, right? I mean, you wouldn't have Grand Theft Auto Dean City in which you can make him carjack
Yeah.
somebody, but there's still that sense of needing to have a temporary sense of command and control over something which is absolutely inaccessible to you in most other situations and places. That's its appeal. So I'm not speaking particularly to the political thing, but a kind of theoretical issue that's really, I think, very poorly theorized is how do we talk about interactivity in terms of its opportunities and limitations, as opposed to simply saying that interactivity is always per se good or not, you know? I think that's still really a gray area, and so you're in that practice part
It's
of it.
not good, or, I mean, I don't think it's definitely not all good. So, I mean, I agree with that. I was also speaking more towards, I mean, if you look at the 60s versus today, we all clicked on, America clicked on John F. Kennedy's assassination, and we watched it glued to our sets. And we all had and there are very few times, 9/11, that happens on television. But those kinds of sort of really communal experiences as a nation, where television was the main stay of that, are you know, you now have 500 I mean, all the fragmentation that's going on in the medium anyway, and now further fragmentation with time shifting in that medium. I'm agreeing with you that I think the net is, or things like JLo are becoming the new common experience, even though it's not common because it's a different, we get to watch something different that's more to us, but it's more common than what else is going to be going on, I think, in a lot of ways. It's a weird sort of shift that I definitely don't think is all good. I don't mean the interactivity for interactivity's sake does not mean, you know, it's a better thing.
Okay, in front, please.
Joe mentioned that there are very low barriers to entry, and I agree with that with respect to content creation, but I disagree with respect to access to audiences. And as we have more and more blogs, it's actually more difficult for any one blog, or actually depending on where it stands in the blogosphere, to attract attention. And so there is research that's shown very much a parallel distribution in terms of how much attention different blogs garner, and the top 100 get a huge chunk of audiences, and once you get into the number 1,000, forget number 1 million, very, very few readers. So there might be a low barrier to entry to starting one of these content outlets, but it's really hard. It's actually getting harder to find audiences, and this may be related to the fact that actually you're talking about fragmentation, and it's true that it's definitely increased just because there are more numbers of whether TV channels or websites. But in fact, research tends to show that there's less than we might think. And also with respect to websites, data also show that actually the traditional media sources like CNN, they still get the biggest chunk of audiences, right? CNN.com, NewYorkTimes.com. So there isn't, I mean, I agree that there's potential, but the barriers to entry are not that low when it comes to accessing audiences.
The barrier to entry is zero, which means there's like little to lose by for trying or starting your own thing. This having huge ramifications just beyond audiences. So here's the first one. Most newspapers in the country are verging on apoplectic. What do they do about income? Because Craigslist, people are running their "I found your dog" ad on Craigslist and not in the newspaper, and so you're starting to see because there's zero barrier to entry. You're starting to see it have huge effects on the current profit models of existing media, which is going to create, those guys are going to, a lot of them are going to crash, whether my little blog has anything to do with it or not, and how people buy blog ads and communicate across those blogs is not going to have a whole lot to do with whether I have an audience or not is going to have a lot to do with how newspapers have to deal with the changing environment. And I'll give you another one. During the tsunami, I worked at MSNBC. During the tsunami, the major television networks cannot possibly have cameras everywhere. They can't. They can't have correspondence everywhere. So when a guy in Malaysia who's an off-road enthusiast in an off-road club begins telling his story about how his off-road club is getting supplies to for people who are living behind washed out roads in Malaysia, that is stuff that the network took because it couldn't send anybody there. So the more you get these cameras and things out there where individuals can run and shoot something and feed it to the network, the more you're going to have like literally homespun correspondence. I mean, the idea of anybody with a webcam is a blogger. I mean, who can gain coverage on a major network is going to happen. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are changing the power dynamic between is that person a journalist? I mean, I go to a lot of conferences where the mainstream journalist people are just trying to figure out how the hell they exist in this new power shift, because 60 Minutes is another good example. It doesn't matter if the blog has any readership. If there's a blog that says the font size wasn't right that Dan Rather used last night, and those documents are phony, that moves to another blog that linked it to another blog that ends up over on Drudge, and the next thing you know, everybody's questioning 60 Minutes. It didn't start because the Washington Post challenged 60 Minutes. The Washington Post wouldn't challenge 60 Minutes. They assume whatever 60 Minutes is putting up is a verified story. It took the mainstream media a couple of days to figure out there was something wrong with that story. So I think you're going to see a lot of things happen. It gets back to there are a lot of experts out there. Your plumber's an expert, and you're not going to be able to go on CNN and say this is how you fix a sink, when a whole bunch of plumbers who have plumbing blogs say the guy was full of it. That's not how you fix a sink. I mean, literally, you're going to have the ability to talk back and not just because you're CNN, you get to say something. Those days are over.
All right. Actually, we're out of time, so let me thank the panelists again. And I'd also like to remind everyone that there's going to be a reception in the Kim Gallery upstairs starting, well, now. Thank you.